I'm sure you've heard about this since it's going viral everywhere right now, but for those of you who haven't, there's a current trend on the internet where online feminists are announcing that if given the choice between being stranded in the forest with a random man or a wild bear, they would overwhelmingly choose the bear. This all kicked off due to a compilation of random street interviews asking the question on a TikTok account called Screenshot HQ, which basically just seems to be an account tailor-made for this sort of daily life stuff. Let's watch the original clip real quick.
Would you rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear?
Bear. Men are scary.
With a bear.
What I've heard about bears, they don't always attack you, right? Unless you like fuck with them. So maybe a bear.
Depends what man, but probably a bear.
Oh, 100% a bear, which is like terrifying to say, but
Definitely a bear. Some men are very scary out there.
a bear.
I would say a man.
This is, of course, fucking unhinged. These are city-dwelling women who have no idea what bears are like, who have never seen a bear or any other dangerous wild animal, who have frankly never lived outside of their cosmopolitan bubble. As somebody who has seen bears before, it is these women's ignorance that drives them to declare men are somehow more dangerous. Some of these people think that they're making a point when they compare the number of bear attacks versus male attacks, but this is stupid. Nearly every single woman will have interactions with men on a daily basis, but almost nobody's having daily interactions with bears. This isn't a statement about the danger of men, it's a statement about how rarely humans and bears come into contact. Other feminists have pointed to the many high-profile cases of men harassing, abusing, stalking, raping, and killing women as to why they choose the bear. Some of them are saying that they're actually not ignorant of bears, it's just that men are actually worse. And some of them are saying that if you're a man who's questioning this, you are probably one of those men who's actually worse than a bear. You are the problem that women suffer.
I am convinced that the men who don't understand why women would pick a bear over a man are the men that are more dangerous than the bear. I think if you don't understand it, it's more than likely because you are the type of man that is more dangerous than a bear.
I think a lot of this stems from the fact that not all, but many feminists have actually been abused by men in their life, and they're probably damaged because of it, projecting their experiences onto all men. For example, look at this woman's caption. I choose the bear every time. If it's my boyfriend, the bear. A friend, the bear. My dad, the bear. Life and men have given me enough reason to choose the bear anytime over any of them. I don't trust them. I don't think I ever will. Whether they're family or friends or stranger, I choose the bear. I think we can muster an appropriate level of sympathy for this person. She might just be a fucking schizo, but it's far more likely that she suffered at the hands of a man in her life, and she's blaming all men for that experience. Like there is something endemic to men as a class that inherently makes them abusers. And once the civilizing force of society is ripped away, once you're alone in the woods, each and every single man will degenerate into a violent rapist or something. This is not the outlook of a person who hasn't suffered at least some point in their life. Ultimately, though, this is an unhinged response, and the feminists are receiving a lot of well-deserved clapback for it, and they frankly don't like it. The exclamation, "If you're questioning this, you're the kind of man we're talking about," is a lot like that self-fulfilling prophecy of the response to feminism is why we need feminism from the early 2010s bedroom feminist era. When they say, yes, we know how dangerous bears are, this just shows how much worse men are. That's a statement similarly divorced from reality, but also it's a statement that the feminists would mock in any other context. Consider your average incel. Every time I've met an incel who is truly on the all women are whores and I hate them train, it's not because they actually believe it, not usually. It's because they've suffered abuse at the hands of a particularly bad woman, and they're now generalizing that abuse across all women as a trauma response, which is the same thing that a lot of feminists who are talking about this bear discourse are doing. But incels certainly do not receive the same level of grace to process their feelings. In fact, "who hurt you, sweetie" is nowadays just a cliche joke. It was a go-to insult that online feminists used towards incels, or I guess pre-incels. We didn't call them incels back then in the 2010s. But the implication was that the man was abused and lashing out, and the feminist is just kind of mocking him for not having gotten over it by now. Like, oh, who hurt you, sweetie? But imagine saying that to any of these bear enjoyers. Another old 2010s bedroom feminist thing is the M&M bowl analogy. This one actually first went viral almost 10 years ago, we're just a couple of weeks off, and it was a common feminist talking point back in the day. Whenever a man would say not all men are rapists or whatever, this analogy would often come up. Imagine a bowl of M&Ms. 10% of them are poisoned. Go ahead, eat a handful. Not all M&Ms are poison. The implication here is that while most men are good, that doesn't actually matter, because the minority of men ruin it for everyone, and women are correct to be concerned about all men due to the actions of the minority. There's two reasons this analogy doesn't really get used anymore. One is that the minute you switch out the sexes for the races, more progressive-leaning people tend to lose their fucking minds. Progressives often say that although black people might actually commit more crime, you're still a racist for assuming that a random black person you encounter might be dangerous. But they started to have the poisoned M&M thing thrown back in their face. After all, if only 10% of black people are criminals, they're the poisoned M&Ms, why would we ever tolerate that? This logic applies to the bad behavior of any minority group, like Muslims being terrorists or gay men being pedophiles. The poisoned M&M thing was always a bigoted example, but it took the tables being turned repeatedly before progressives ever figured it out. The second reason that the poisoned M&M example isn't really used anymore is because trans activism has pretty much replaced feminism as the core strand of gender leftism online, and the poisoned M&M analogy doesn't really fit into the ideology of the trans activist. If gender's a matter of self-identification, then a male who would otherwise be in that 10% of poisoned M&Ms can simply self-ID as a woman, become trans, and break out of the paradigm entirely. The script flips at this point, where originally the progressive position was basically an essentialist one, that men and testosterone and male socialization and whatever else caused them to have this 10% poisonous M&M rate. But in an era of trans activism, essentialism is considered problematic. I bring this up because the bear conversation we're having right now actually suffers from the same problem that the M&M analogy did. The second one is shaking out to basically just be a funny meme, a version of which Sargon reposted. If there is something in the nature of males that makes them more dangerous than a bear, then why would you want a male, even a transitioned one, in a bathroom with women? These positions are inherently contradictory, like how most progressive feminism is contradictory with most progressive trans activism. But the first one, where you adapt the analogy to black people to show how bigoted it is, that's also taken on its own viral form. Whenever a person says, yes, I would choose a bear over any man, or any other bit of male-hating nonsense like kill all men or whatever, the meme reply is to say, even George Floyd? The comparison's obvious. George Floyd is treated like a saint by the modern progressive, a true martyr who has become the moral center of an entire movement, while in life he was actually a really shitty person. One of the progressives' most sanctified icons is also a member of one of their most vilified classes, and once again they can't make the contradiction work. At the start of the video, I made the point that women who are choosing bears live in a cosmopolitan bubble where they've never experienced a bear before. I almost said a safe cosmopolitan bubble back then, but you know, cities aren't really safe right now, considering the current crime wave that is slowly on the rise, along with increased homelessness and drug abuse. It could be the case that these women choose bears over men, not only because they're totally ignorant of bears, but because they also only have negative experiences with the men around them. Hell, I don't even need to make a racial comparison this time. I read this article on the Weekly Sip recently, where a woman who was 39 years old slashed a man with glass because he guessed she was 43, and she basically got away with it. This is fucking nuts, dude. Female violence against men not getting taken seriously at all in comparison to male violence against women is outside of the scope of this video, so I won't linger on it, but it speaks to the same problem as every other example we've gone over today. There is a feminist double standard regarding who has the privilege of being a victim that is taken seriously by society. Oh well, at least the memes are fire. Nothing like seeing a bear typing on a computer telling women to choose them over men, or men sneaking into the woods dressed as bears in order to pick up women, or bears being totally exasperated by the women who have chosen them. However, I'll end with this excerpt from an article on glamour.com on the whole story. Why is this becoming such a thing? The best answer is that this ultimately silly social media trend is exposing some hard truths. Namely, that so many men just don't get it still. The gap between the experience of a person who identifies as a man and a person who identifies as a woman is still so vast, and many cisgender men don't understand how much danger men pose to a cisgender woman, not to mention queer, non-binary, and trans people. There's a lot of upset men on TikTok, everyone. Please pray for them. Some are joking, saying, y'all haven't watched enough nature documentaries, but as many women have pointed out, that's not the point. What women are saying is not that they think they could outrun the bear, or the bear isn't scary, or that they wouldn't get killed by the bear. They're saying that the potential outcome of the bear attack is still far less frightening than what a man could do to them, which, yikes. Maybe the dudes yelling about this should unpack that. Okay, let's unpack it. Here's what's at the heart of this whole conversation. Feminism has won. The second wave feminists successfully waged a campaign that allowed women to have careers in their own rights, not simply be middle-class housewives or lower-class servants. And to their credit, activating the productive capacity of 50% of the population is a good thing, as is women having the opportunity to be financially independent from abusive husbands and fathers. But it's not like feminism was all sunshine and rainbows. These were not purely good policies. They came with negative trade-offs that feminists and progressives more generally don't like to talk about. Women are no longer materially reliant on men, which means that men are no longer obligated to provide for them. But this also means that men are no longer obligated to abide by women's moral prescriptions. Here's what I mean. Have you ever known a positive example of a traditional relationship? Maybe an older uncle or an aunt, or grandparents or something, who grew up in some pre-feminist era? Or maybe you've met one of the few younger couples who are still living a traditional lifestyle. Or maybe you've read some accounts from the past. In all of these cases, you've probably noticed that if the relationship is traditional and positive, yes, the man is bringing home the bacon and the woman's taking care of the home, but the woman is also the source of morality for the family unit. The man might be the head of the house, but the woman is the neck that turns it. This isn't strictly an equal relationship, but it is a fair and mutual one, where they each have duties to each other. When something goes wrong, the man is expected to deal with it, and the woman expects her concerns to be dealt with. The liberation of women didn't just mean liberation from the oppression of bad men. It also meant the unmooring of women from their relationships with good men, as those relationships are based in mutual interlocking obligations to each other. Obligation means responsibility. Responsibility means being held to a standard, and standards means prescribed behavior. Insofar as prescribed behavior is an oppression that women must be liberated from, women's liberation also meant liberation from having to adhere to a standard, which means liberation from responsibility, which means liberation from obligation to a partner, which means liberation from relationships themselves. This is why feminists began to realize that having it all also meant doing it alone, and to be liberated from men was actually a very lonely thing, considering that many of them still wanted to ultimately get married to a man one day. It's no surprise that with the rise of internet feminism, feminism transitioned from an empowering movement to a neurotic one, constantly proclaiming women's inherent weaknesses rather than their strengths, demanding that men do something about it rather than letting them go. But that ship's already sailed. Women as a class can no longer make moral demands of men as a class. They lost that right with their own liberation. 2010's online feminism was all about stuff like rape culture and obsessing over college campus statistics and the glass ceiling and the patriarchy controlling everything. Because regardless of how true or false any of those things actually are, the moral trajectory of feminism has reached its logical conclusion. In liberating women from men, feminism has also liberated women from those good men who, in the past, would have been the bulwark between them and the bad men and the bears and all sorts of other problems. Feminists have torn down their own walls, and they're now remarking how cold the wind is. This is why I brought up those incels earlier. Both the feminists choosing the bears over the men, and the incels calling all women whores, are relying on the same patterns of thinking. Bad people have probably hurt them both, and in response they would rather destroy all relations between the genders, including the positive ones, as long as they didn't ever have to feel this way again. But that isn't a fix. The woman who wrote that Glamour article is describing a world of female vulnerability, created by the rejection of men as a necessary component of women's lives. Despite feminism promising empowerment with their emancipation, women also got quite a huge dose of the opposite along with it. This is what it means to be independent and liberated and empowered. You don't need no man. Women can deal with the rapists and muggers and the bears all on your own. And when you ask where the good men have gone, the ones who are meant to be helping you in exactly these scenarios, the answer is you have sent them away, and you have only yourself to blame.